Hello, my name is Kelly Hines McDermott of Hines Communications, and I'm excited to be here today with Kyle Lai and Adam Bowen. Today we're going to talk about how technology can be a solution to protect CUI, controlled unclassified information, and other sensitive files. So welcome, guys. First, I'd like to introduce our experts. Adam Bowen is Head of Sales and Growth at Anchor, and Kyle Lai is President and CISO at KLC Consulting. And just to kind of set the table, CUI is sensitive information and it must be protected. That is the bottom line here. And today we're going to talk about ways that technology can help to do just that. Just as a quick aside, when it comes to the military, for instance, this is how serious this can be. The loss of aggregated CUI represents one of the most significant risks in national security, and it can impact the lives of military service members if it's not protected. I mean, this is how deep this goes. So the stakes are high in protecting CUI, and let's talk today about how technology can help. So let's get started here with Kyle. So Kyle, what do you see as the challenges for handling CUI and CMMC compliance today?
Yeah, right now, the biggest thing is about scope, because a lot of time we don't know what is CUI. And when you have a CUI, you are not too sure how to handle them and what is the requirements. So I think that is still a lot of the confusion out there about the CUI handling, the scope, which is very, very important. That is probably the very first thing that you should do when you are talking about CUI. Understand what is CUI first, then understand how to handle it. If you don't really know what to do and don't have the internal staff that are very familiar with CUI, you definitely can get outside help. You also want to make sure you get the top management support within the company, because if you don't have the support, then you will be, you will not have this budget that's needed to implement the proper control for handling CUI. So I will say these are the three biggest challenges right now that I can see.
Great. Yeah, all good points. Adam, what challenges do you see from your end?
I mean, certainly all the things that Kyle said, for sure. But if I even look at, some of them just don't even know where to start. Perhaps they don't even know what scope is, right? So, for example, I deal with sometimes companies that are just 5 people. They're a mom and pop company, and they're maybe one of 3, specialized companies in the country that knows how to anodize tank bolts, for example, right? And so that's all they do. And so now they have this requirement on there, so they don't even know where to start. Like, what's an assessment? What's scope? I have everything. How do I segment? And it just seems so overwhelming that you become paralyzed in fear. Like, you can't start on anything because you're just so overwhelmed by all the stuff, right? So that's, I think, where Kyle said too, outside help is a big benefit, but of course they're paralyzed by cost too. Like, oh my gosh, like what would that be? So that is really kind of a hard spot for some of the smaller DIB, defense industrial based customers that might just turn over like maybe a few $1 million perhaps in revenue a year, and then they might be faced with a 6-figure, perhaps, in their mind, 6-figure cost to try and become compliant. And they're analyzing, do I even just get out of this entirely, right? So that's a very real thing. And then also too is just, as you're introducing this stuff, these mom and pop companies have been doing it the same way for 60, 70, perhaps, it's a generational thing. So perhaps they're doing it the same way their grandfather, did it back in the day, taking bolt by bolt and hand dipping it, anodizing it or what have you. But so introducing new technology can oftentimes means breaking like the workflow of business. You can't do things the same way anymore. And so, again, trying to teach old dogs new tricks, that's something that very, especially in the DIB, I feel, that's something that's been doing a lot of things the same way for generations, if not decades. The process really hasn't changed too much. That can be big challenges for them becoming, adapting to these Herculean requirements that are being put on them. So,
right. And to your point, or both of your points, is that this paralysis sets in because people get so overwhelmed with the glossary of terms. What is scope? What do I need to do first? How do I implement this into our systems? I have to learn new tricks. So for a lot of folks, it's easier just to put the whole thing off and wait until the pain point gets so great that you're forced to do something. And I think, what we're trying to do here today is share some tips with folks on what they can do today that are cost effective and can help streamline things in a way that's going to lead you down that path to CMMC compliance and greater security. So these are all really good points. Kyle, so we hear about data breaches and system compromises on the news every single day. There seems to be not a day that goes by when we don't hear some, exploding news about some data breach. So why does this keep happening?
Attackers, they're getting more and more sophisticated. And without knowing what they're up to these days, I think it will be hard for you to protect yourself. So there's a lack of awareness from the defender's point of view on what are some of the latest tactics implemented by the cyber attackers, the cyber criminals, right? Once you know that, you have a little bit better understanding, and then you can implement the proper controls. But if you're talking about the proper controls, you have to talk about the skill sets, right? It's not cheap to implement the cybersecurity, and it's not easy to get the right skill set or have people trained up with the right skill set in-house. So sometimes you do need to, have a budget to hire the right people to do the job, right? And sometimes it include the outside help. But the budgeting, it is a challenge. However, you need to prioritize. For example, access controls or some of the two-factor authentication or just some of the endpoint protection. Some of these basic controls, basic foundational controls that you want to put in place to defend yourself, right? And they are, again, attackers, they are getting very, very sophisticated. So it's not if, it's when you're going to get attacked. So you better prepare yourself and just putting all the fundamental technologies, tools together.
Mm-hmm. I like what you said about prioritizing, and again, it gets back to the point of you have to do it, but you sometimes have to start small, right? And you've got to take care of these things. So if you prioritize, it seems less overwhelming and more manageable to get started in this process. And also when it comes to CUI, because there are fewer controls over CUI compared to classified information, for instance, CUI is a target for malicious actors searching for weak links every day. So this is kind of their go-to spot because there are fewer controls over CUI, so it makes it easier for the bad actors to infiltrate, underscoring the fact that we have to keep putting these controls in place and protection in place. So Kyle, what about an example of a client where they had a data breach? And as we try to get our arms around this in the real world, what does this look like? Can you share an example of that?
Sure, yeah, I'll give you a couple of examples. So there are more and more phishing, spear phishing attacks through the third party, through your suppliers. And the reason is that for an attacker to attack some of the bigger companies, it is very difficult because the large companies, they do have very good protection. However, they do trust their suppliers, the subcontractors. So why don't they just attack the subcontractors? Once they attack the subcontractors, their email systems, for example, that's what we saw mostly. Once they compromise the suppliers' email system, they will use that supplier, their subcontractor, to send out a phishing email. For example, send out the invoice. Hey, we have the problem with the invoice, and here's the invoice file. Using this trusted email address, send it to the prime contractor, right? And say, here's a problem. Then without thinking too much, some of the emails with the invoice will be opened by the prime contractor employees. And suddenly these prime contractors will get compromised, and once the email system is compromised, then they can get onto other systems that might get a ransomware or may get the files stolen. So that is something that we see more and more with our customers. They don't get compromised by the attacker directly, but they could get compromised by attacker attacking their subcontractors and got to them. Mm-hmm. And another one is there was a Microsoft Exchange problem just not too long ago, and our customer actually got compromised because they were late to patching the Microsoft Exchange server. They're only late by a couple of days, but that was too late for them. Yeah, because once you have the exploit code published, attackers are all going to jump on them, start attacking using the exploit code. And they were only 2 days, couple days late on patching because they think they have a week when attackers, they start attacking like right away, and they got compromised. Mm-hmm. And once they got compromised, we have to investigate what is going on with the server, what is going on with their network, monitor the malicious activities on their network, right? And we have to ask them to rebuild their servers. So as you can see, there are a lot of activities that have to happen, investigation, forensics, and then remediation, recovery. So there are a lot of stuff that have to be done after you have a compromise. And on top of that, you don't know if there are sensitive information that are stolen, and then you have to report to all the authorities and your customers. Right. So these are something that's pretty real that we have to deal with our customers. So if there are more protections, more controls you can put onto your systems, your networks, the better.
Right. I mean, you can see how this could really stop a company in its tracks, it gets very costly. They basically can't function as a business for a while. It takes time to remediate, to put the right controls in place.
Yep.
So it just compounds it when you don't have the protection in place at the right time, and stay vigilant about that. And those are all really good points. Adam, what about you? Any data breach stories you want to share?
There's one that always sticks out in my mind because it was almost like a written for movie tale, right? That the sequence comes out there's like a terrible obvious movie plot, but I started talking to a manufacturer at one point. They were interested in talking to us about what we do, et cetera. They're already on their CMMC journey. And, they said, hey, look, we're good. We have generally we have all the things in there. We think that Anchor might be a nice addition, but we're finishing our CMMC compliance stuff. We just have a couple little things left to do and we'll be done. But we have all the things, all the protections, anti-phishing stuff, all that stuff. Well, sometime we started talking to them. Within a couple months, I connected with them again, and what had happened was they'd actually got compromised via some of the methods that Kyle had already spoken about in that case. But in their case, they had a system that was compromised, and one of the systems that were compromised was an engineer's laptop that they used to download flow down from the big. So they downloaded that package that contained CUI, CAD designs, PDFs, and all that stuff. They downloaded it to this laptop, and then what they generally do is then they take it and upload it to their MRP system and a secured system that they use to store all this CUI and control access to. Well, that system was compromised. And so when that system was compromised, even though it only existed on that system for a short period of time, that compromised system, the data was exfiltrated off of that system and out, and it was published in the public sphere. So you talk about that. So not only once they found out they had a system breach, they didn't know about it, right? They found they had a system breach, but they didn't know what was leaked, because as Kyle said, that forensics, that's nigh impossible. It takes an army of people, and then how do you know what file shares and things were accessed? You simply don't have that kind of logging and ability today generally. And so, but they found out because it was published in the public sphere. But guess who else found out? The Department of Justice. And so when I got on the phone with them, they actually contacted me. It's hey, after I'm done doing these DOJ interviews for the next few weeks, I want to pick up the conversations about Anchor. But that was a big mess for them. Obviously, they don't enjoy talking to the Department of Justice about that stuff. It was very costly for them in that breach to figure out. And then, of course, they had to spend a lot of time and energy figuring out, well, what else could have possibly been affected and taken toll. So once they get into one thing, we all think about, oh, they hacked a system, but it's all the collateral damage that goes into that really, I think there's a metric within an event like this. Most small businesses go out of business within 6 months. I think the statistic still rings true, but thankfully they're a little bit larger. And of course that wasn't a catastrophic failure for them, but
Right.
that's because they have some deeper pockets, and a lot of small businesses don't have, six figures to spend on an incident response.
Right. You're speaking to that cascading effect, right? You had started off by saying it was just the little things they needed to button up before they went on to the next step. And the little things, unbeknownst to them, had this cascading effect that not only affected their business, but also you have to think about the impact of brand reputation. This was shared publicly in the public eye that they had this breach. That kind of sends a shockwave to some of their customers to say, do they have everything buttoned up? You have a little bit of brand reputation that goes along with that too. That takes a while to recover that trust and that loyalty from your customers when something like that happens.
Yep.
So, yeah, that's a good story to share. How could this have been different if they had the right technology in place, like Anchor, for instance?
Sure. So that's kind of why he reached out. Like they knew, they could say, we knew this would have been different. So one of the interesting things is that, yes, there are ways that we actually help you meet, actual controls and check the box and get through your compliant stuff and, become more secure. But there's also things in CMMC that they could have had all those boxes checked, but Anchor actually provides security. There's a difference between security and compliance, and Kyle's far more of an expert on that than I am. But what would have been in this case, and CMMC doesn't have a requirement for, is that if they would have had Anchor in place, which they do now, so they did become a customer. But if Anchor was in place back then before they had the event, then once there's a few things that happen. One is that the data that was stolen, it would have been ciphertext, and we can look at specific guidance from DFARS and ITAR both that talk about, it's called the encryption rule for ITAR, but DFARS talks about data that is end-to-end encrypted with FITS validated encryption is not CUI, right? That ciphertext, it's not CUI. And so those attackers in that case would have just stolen ciphertext. So no information would have been at risk. They would have had a system breach, but not a data breach. So that would have been huge for them. There's a lot of trappings we could talk about, the things they would have had to do, but so that would have been great. So talk about reputation damage. It would have been preserved. There would have been no Department of Justice interviews. So I'm sure they would have viewed that as a big thing. That's incalculable. But then also too, their ability to respond to it would have been near instantaneous, because once data is protected by Anchor, every access is logged. So they would have easily been able to go and say, this system was breached. Show me a log for the last 72 hours of every piece of CUI that was accessed via this system. And they would have known the possibility of X amount of data files were in place. I think they have roughly about 1 million files protected by Anchor now. So out of 1 million files, they would have said, oh, these 5 are potentially at risk. Now let's go figure out if those 5 were actually exposed, generated a report in less than 30 seconds that they could have attached to their incident response and been done with the whole kind of thing. So one person in a matter of seconds, rather than an army of people for weeks to do the incident response, and costing them, no doubt, easily to estimate thousands of dollars in that incident response. So,
right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to transition. That's a great segue into, tell us a little bit more about what Anchor does. I mean, you sort of walked us through the steps of how you would have helped this particular company, but I think it makes sense to hear a little bit more about what Anchor does at this point.
Sure. So, basically, Anchor, where traditional IT controls focus on locking down networks, devices, and people, all the things around data in the name of protecting data, they kind of fail in 2 major aspects. One is, once files are moved, shared, or stolen, just like in that example I gave a second ago, those data controls no longer apply. But second, a lot of these things just get in the way and interrupt business workflow or stop the way business behaves. And so, you get this constant war on that. So Anchor actually bakes invisible protection into the data itself. So that way, wherever the data is used, wherever it travels, it's always protected. So like an example I gave, even if the Anchor data was stolen from the customer and put into, I don't know where it went to, we'll just say Russia, because they're the hot topic right now, that all they would have been taken was ciphertext. And since Anchor, what we do is 3 things to protect the data. First is we encrypt it transparently with FITS validated encryption. So whatever state it's in, it's always in that state. So that's what helps us check the mark for DFARS and ITAR and what they describe as self-protecting CUI. So every piece of CUI that is anchored is transparently FITS validated encrypted. We combine that with multi-factor access controls that are constantly checking, for example, Kelly, that you're in the office using your office computer on Microsoft Excel and looking at the financial spreadsheets. The minute or the second you're now in a Starbucks, for an example, Anchor closes those documents down because you're not passing the authorization controls. And it's always a fail closed system because it's zero trust. So trust is never implied, continuously checking. You go back to the office, you're good again, right? And all that activity is logged. And that's really the third part that brings this. Every anchored CUI, since we're talking about CUI in this case, has a granular access log that says, Kelly accessed it when she was using Microsoft Excel. Here's her geographic location, if that's one of the things in there, and has a record for each and every single one of those, including a line that says, we revoked Kelly's access because she was in the Starbucks. Okay, it doesn't say you were in a Starbucks, but basically it says we revoked her access because she's not in the office. Right. So those three things together are continually being enforced. And so that means basically now each piece of CUI is kind of what they call self-protecting, using DFARS's term. And so that's what we do. And we do it without you having to set up a special enclave, without you having to change your existing IT controls and workflow. And all this is invisible to the end user. So no funky right-click menus, no change of extensions. You double-click a spreadsheet today to open it, Kelly. You double-click the spreadsheet tomorrow to open it. Nothing changes in Anchor. So that's kind of our superpower, if you will, is the transparency to the end users, like antivirus.
Yeah, it sounds very user-friendly. And also, if somebody were to steal that data and try to get it on their machine, it would come in as gobbledygook, right? They wouldn't be able to read it, do anything with it, because that would be all gibberish.
Yeah, it's always ciphertext, right? And the only time that it's made available in plain text, which is the way we like to use and work with data, is the individual would have to be on the right device and the right system, be enrolled and passing all these authorization, transparent authorization things that are going on in the background. And only for that individual user during that time, it's made to use. So it's open the spreadsheet. Otherwise, it's always ciphertext. So it's with Anchor, it's never a matter, since it's zero trust for file access, it's never a matter, how does Anchor know to lock it down? It's always locked down. The question is then, how does Anchor know, how to make it available, in plain text? And that's what we're talking about with the multi-factor access controls.
Yeah, all good stuff. So, Kyle, how can you see, this is a great example of technology in cybersecurity today and CUI protection. How do you see new technology increasing as a trend to help SMBs deal with protection, sensitive file protection? What's going on in the technology space today?
Access control is one of the big requirements. About one fifth of the requirements are in the access control, and they have the right identity authentication in place. This is definitely one of the challenges. That how do you put the proper access control on the files? So only people with the proper authorization can access those files. It's become challenging. And how do you know if they have the files, they are not copying anywhere, right? There are insider threats. They are copying to their own before they leave the company, right? They can copy it to their hard drive and they'll leave the company. These are some of the challenges that Anchor is solving for these kind of scenarios. Especially insider threats. Nowadays, you hear on the news, right? All these larger companies, right? In the defense contractors as well. When they move to another company, they start downloading a lot of this information. Obviously, you want to have some kind of a network detection to say, oh, hey, there are some weird activities going on for this person, right? That may come after the facts. When you find out the files might already left your company, right? So you want to have that layer of protection, and the anchors have that type of protection in place. Yep. Once you define the place that you should store, and there's the authorized place to store the information, the files, then they should not be able to move to another place that's not authorized. So yeah, those are one of the big advantage for Anchor, and they'll really make sure that file stays where it's supposed to be.
Right. And this is incredibly important as the workforce will continue to change over. People they leave jobs. They're also working remotely. So all the more important to make sure that with the digital information that's out there, that we're doing everything we can to protect it. And technology goes a long way in helping us do that.
Yep.
Adam, what kinds of NIST controls does a company like Anchor handle?
Sure. So there's over 27 NIST controls that Anchor directly addresses. For our customers, we share with them our security architecture. We give them a shared responsibility matrix, which, I think that's going to be required of every company here in the future. But we're very proactive on this since we realize we have a large base of our customers in the CMMC, a zone, if you want to call it that, having, being an OSC organization seeking compliance. So we produce that automatically. And of those 27 controls, like almost all of them, I don't remember the exact number, it might be like 25, but all but a couple of them we fully address, right? And then only a few of them we partially address. So this is a great win for people on that, and we share that. And like while we're talking on that subject, the big kind of main three things that we help customers with from a CMMC like compliance perspective, we talked about stopping the data exfiltration. There's not actually a CMMC requirement to like not allow your data to be exfiltrated. Sounds crazy, but that's kind of bonus on the cake or icing on the cake. But the three areas we help with CMMC compliance is first, reduce complexity. So you don't have to, we can protect CUI wherever it's at on your existing file servers. If it's on laptops and on servers, it doesn't require you to have to try and get everything organized into one location first to do it. You still might want to do that, but it doesn't require it to actually protect that CUI. That CUI can be self-protecting wherever it lives because of the way we implement our technology. You don't have to buy an expensive storage to do it or a particular type of storage. You can have like GCC High, you can also have file servers, you can also have devices, even mobile devices, and Anchor can make sure that CUI is protected wherever it's at and support if you want to actually move it all together. So that helps eliminate a lot of complexity. And then second thing is it reduces scope significantly because once CUI is anchored, only the intersection of a device, person, and the other authorization access controls on that is the only manner in which that CUI can be accessed. So if I have like five, let's just say I have thousands of devices on my network and I've anchored all my CUI and I only have 5 laptops and 5 phones, we'll say, that have the Anchor, agent or enrolled for Anchor on it, then those are the only 10 that are actually in scope for accessing that CUI, either as a CUI asset or even a contractor managed risk asset, that because nothing else can even incidentally be used to access those CUI files because it simply cannot without an Anchor agent on it. So until that happens, it's kind of out of scope from that perspective. So it can really simplify that, especially for organizations that have both a CMMC side of the business and a commercial side of the business as well. And then the third thing is, again, I think we talked about earlier, is just the incident response, being able to just in a few seconds in the event that you do have a breach, as Cal said, it's not a matter of if and when, you're able to quickly go and generate a report. And even if things are compromised, you have a quick report saying, okay, these 6 things are in scope and not, almost a million things could possibly be in scope in that. So that's kind of how the NIST controls and CMMC at large, how we help customers in that specific vein.
That's a great overview. Thank you.
Sure.
Sounds very comprehensive, user-friendly and comprehensive too. You're covering all the bases there.
We try.
Kyle, how would working with KLC and Anchor help me as a client? Say I'm a manufacturer or aerospace or one of our clients. How would this partnership help me?
Right. So KLC, we help our customers identify the CMMC compliance gaps, right? So we identify what are some of the deficiencies, and we will, recommend the proper solutions. And one of the things that we like about Anchor is that when it comes to the file protection, digital rights management, I know it's an older term, but these are some of the things I was looking at since 2006, right? When I was working for one of the big financial company at that time, I was looking for solutions. The solutions were out there, but they are bulky. They are not easy to implement. And when it comes to sharing the data with other third parties, it becomes impossible. And like what Adam was saying, have to be intuitive, something that you can implement fairly quickly. Back then, there are not really a cloud solution that is very easy. This is something that I see that we can actually very quickly improve the CMMC, the NIST 800-171 compliance level, right? Access control. You will have to have the file encryption. You will need to have the CUI encrypted You need to have the file control. You need to have the sensitive files access logging, right? CUI access logging and monitoring. So all these are something that not easy to implement. And something like Anchor, they can say, yep, we actually have all these controls in place. So that instantly give big boost into the compliance to the smaller companies that are really lacking this type of access controls, encryptions, and monitoring, right? And also have to be intuitive. And the tools is not really useful if the company cannot really implement it quickly and it's too hard to use, right? So that's what I like about Anchor, and it's something that you can actually implement it quickly. Yeah. And if the files are stolen, you don't have to report to DoD, say, hey, the file is stolen, because the files are encrypted. And that becomes less of a burden, less of a worry. If there's a problem, if there's a compromise, we want to make sure that files are still protected. The company, the network could be compromised, but we can be sure that, hey, we have demonstrated that the files, they stay encrypted. If they are stolen, they're encrypted, right? So that is something that is very, very big deal. When you have to go through a data breach, security incident investigation, forensics with DoD, that is a big deal, right? It's going to take your time and energy, right?
Yeah. To be avoided at all costs.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Right.
So as you pointed out, Kyle, our goal together at KLC and Anchor is that we try to get our clients the most up-to-date information technology solutions and services in an expedited time frame. We want to be able to get them those services very quickly and those solutions very quickly that are user-friendly. So there isn't a big ramp up to learning how to do this or how to implement it. And then people would be more readily to adopt that into their systems. And they also need it to be at a competitive price. I think some people think that this is going to cost exponential dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to put the most basic programs into place. And we're going to hear in a little bit about, an example of costs around this. But, the important thing is that we work together to help people with their gaps and then provide the tools that they need in a user-friendly way so that they can keep their CUI protected. So Adam, we talked a little bit about clients, and I'm just wondering, I'd like to hear from you about aerospace and manufacturing, engineering, machine shop companies. These are all examples of companies that we work with all the time, and they face obstacles in protecting their CUI. So you touched on this earlier, but I want to hear a little bit more about how Anchor helps with these kinds of clients in particular.
Sure. I mean, I'd say, we touched on, we touched on some of it earlier, but I'd say, over half of my customer base is from these sectors. And the reason, there's kind of this affinity, almost like this magnet or moth to the light flame type thing going on here, not because we do, anything special or unique for manufacturing or aerospace, but because of the way our technology is, we're agnostic to any file type and any application. So you can look at, listeners here might have been like, well, how's that different from X and Y? The biggest, solutions that they're comparing in their head. The biggest thing is that we're not unique to any particular type of product. So you can look at some products that are great at just protecting PDFs or just great at protecting Office documents, but not great at protecting things that exist in, I'll call legacy style businesses, that have unique bespoke line of business applications. So AutoCAD designs, custom MRP applications, ERP applications, those types of things. So because Anchor is kind of agnostic to the application of what's going on, we protect all these things the same way. So being able to give you the same type of technology and it's called digital rights management, though it is a dated kind of term, but being able to kind of extend all those same types of protections that you've been able to do for say Office for a decade is now even, an enhanced version of that is now even available for just your CAD designs, your intellectual property, right? The things, your backends of your MRP systems, et cetera, where all this sensitive data is stored. So that's a huge benefit for them, because not only do we actually bring protection to the things that were just underserved, right, in their industry. But it's the same protection scheme that they can use to protect everything. So it doesn't mean they have to have then a separate tool to protect CAD and a separate tool to protect MRP and a separate tool to then also protect their office documents, right, for an example. So this is huge for people trying to reduce complexity, not just for the end user, but for the IT staff, which, a good portion of my customers in the smaller end don't have an IT staff. Their IT staff is their nephew, right? So so that simplicity is super key in that. So they want to just anodize tank bolts using that example from earlier. All they want to do is continue to anodize tank bolts, not have to all of a sudden become, information technology experts, right? So that's how we kind of help in those sectors.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
Yeah. So this all sounds kind of expensive. How much does this cost?
Yeah, well, for our listeners, if they act now, we have operators standing by for special discount prices, right? But seriously, this one of the things that, simple, transparent, and affordable. Those are like our 3 key values here at Anchor. Very straightforward. Our list price for end users is just $192 per person a year with a minimum, a minimum of 10 users. So, give you an example, like we have the mom and pop shop. Again, I'm using this as an example. There are like 5 or 6 people. They're using Anchor and protecting their CUI assets for less than $2,000 a year, right? So and I have customers I have customers in the enterprise that are like thousands, anywhere from that. But we're affordable. We're as accessible to the mom and pop company as we are to large enterprises, right? So for less than $2,000 a year, they're doing that at our list price. And our solution it's pretty, again, simple, transparent, affordable. From the time they get in there and we start with them, they're fully onboard, trained, and off to the races, back to business, not seeing anything, in the way in less than 60 minutes. So we're talking about a mom and pop company, nothing about IT, their nephew's kind of running, making sure their stuff's up and running. They're just, 60 minutes of their time and they're back to anodizing tank bolts and their book of business is continuing and they're not thinking about this anymore, right, from that perspective. So that's the big key thing for us, is that transparency and that simplicity is what really separates us apart.
Right. Well, it's all really good information, really good to know, and super helpful, because to your point, some of the larger companies have a built-in technology department and they deal with these kinds of things all the time, where if you get a SMB or a mom and pop shop who are doing it on their own, to have something that's very user-friendly like this and is very effective and affordable is really the kinds of things that we at KLC like to share with folks out there and with our clients too, as we try to get better at what we do and combat the threats that are out there. So we're happy to share that. So I wanted to thank both Kyle and Adam for joining today. I thought there was a lot of great information shared and some really good examples of what's going on out there and what people can do. It seems to me too, as we've had this conversation, that we can't underscore the importance of being proactive, right? I mean, we hear about all these data breaches every day, and we hear about I should have done this, or I needed to do a little bit more and I didn't get around to it, or I was paralyzed with fear about it, so I did nothing. But just taking the small steps to be proactive, this is my public service announcement. There seemed to be this common thread about being proactive, so that folks don't have to be reactive and take all that time and cost and energy that it takes to basically have their business shut down while they deal with a data breach. And there are some really simple steps and consulting solutions to bridge those gaps that we're here to offer. So thank you both for sharing your expertise with us today. It was great. And if you have any questions out there for Kyle or Adam, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll have the information on the screen. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.